welcome to the 92nd Street Y. There's many things we'll try to fill in about her biographical data. You know, and we begin with the fact that she was appointed to the Supreme Court in 1993 by President Clinton and has served there, but she came to the court with a distinguished career as a professor, as an appeals court judge, and as a litigator. She was a great, great trial lawyer, and she has distinguished herself.
Appellate
lawyer.
Appellate
Right.
lawyer.
Not trial. She's right. Were you a teacher also correcting me so early? So let's just begin by talking about, I know you can't talk about specifics of cases, but you have said that this session of the court, which begins on the first Monday in October, October 2nd, is going to be a momentous year.
Yes.
Why is that? This is not a yes and no. Why? What's coming before the court in a country that has learned to respect the court so much, probably more so than the other two branches of government, I might say?
That's because we know how to disagree without being disagreeable.
That's the quality of the court and not the quality of the country right now. Yeah.
So what's on our calendar?
You got redistricting? You're going to tackle
Yes.
redistricting?
Yes, it's partisan redistricting.
Right.
It's drawing a map so people think, why bother voting? This is a secure Republican district, or this is a secure Democratic district, so my vote doesn't count. That's not a good thing for democracy.
What else is coming up this year?
I think the case that has gotten the most attention is the Baker's case.
You tell them about that.
This is
About a wedding.
a baker in Colorado who refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple. His view was, I will sell them my ordinary cakes, I will sell them my cookies, but I will not create a wedding cake for them because that involves expression. I'm kind of an artist, and when I make a cake for a wedding, I am creating something. And this is against my religious beliefs. So it's a clash between anti-discrimination on the one hand. The Colorado Commission on Human Rights said, I'm sorry, if you want to be in business and sell things to people, you can't distinguish among customers. And on his side is a religious freedom claim.
When did you fall in love with the law?
When did I?
Yeah. You've lived your life in the law. You were married to a lawyer.
When I married my dear Marty, neither of us were lawyers.
Right.
I say it was in the early 50s when I was a student at Cornell. My first idea was to be a high school history teacher. That was a job where women were welcome. But then in the 50s were bad times for the United States. There was a huge Red Scare in the country.
McCarthyism was running.
I worked for a professor of constitutional law who pointed out to me that the Senate Investigating Committee, the House Un-American Activities Committee were hauling people before the committee and quizzing them about their associations at the height of the Depression in the 30s. There were lawyers standing up for these people and explaining to the members of the congressional committees, our Constitution has a First Amendment. It says people have the right to think, speak, and write as they believe, and not as Big Brother government tells them is the right way to think, speak, and write. And also we have a Fifth Amendment that protects us against self-incrimination. So I got the idea that being a lawyer is a pretty nifty thing.
Yeah. Turned out well for you. And you went to law school, went to Harvard.
Yes, but my degree is from Columbia.
I know, we're going to get to that
Okay.
story. Get ahead of me.
Okay.
So you went to Columbia, went to Harvard to law school, and then you moved back to New York to Columbia, and finished at Columbia, took courses at Columbia. Later, you wanted to get your degree from Harvard. And they wanted to give you even later, the law school, because a dean is now, in fact, one of your fellow justices, Justice Kagan. And you turned it down. You didn't want an honorary degree from the law school. This is the spirit this person has. You wanted an honorary degree from the university itself.
Yeah, I had a very sage counselor in that request. It was my husband.
Yes.
When Elena Kagan became dean of the Harvard Law School, she called and said, "Ruth, we would love you to have a Harvard Law School degree." And Marty said, "Hold out for an honorary degree from the university."
Yeah.
Which I got in the year 2011, sadly, the year after he died.
Yeah. It was a fabulous marriage.
Yes, and I did. Well, Marty
Because he did the cooking.
In the beginning, he was the company and the weekend cook. I was never permitted to cook for company. And then my daughter Jane, who's in the audience tonight, when she was in high school, figured out that Daddy's cooking was ever so much better than Mommy's. So why should Daddy be just the weekend and company cook?
Yeah.
So I was phased out of the kitchen. And since 1980, I have not made a meal.
Not one.
Well, I could do that.
37 years.
So what happened after Marty died in 2010? Jane, who was responsible for phasing me out of the kitchen, she comes periodically to DC, spends all day cooking, puts individual dinners in my freezer.
Yes. You don't like for me to say this, and you have said to me before, but you're considered, with respect to women's rights, the Thurgood Marshall of feminism. You are. Anybody who knows about the history of the legal battles believes that, but you have been very reticent with that comparison.
Yes, it's not an apt comparison because whatever I did, I should say we copied Thurgood Marshall's technique in that is making building blocks, not asking the court to take a giant step. So Thurgood Marshall would say to courts, separate but equal is not before the House today. These facilities are vastly unequal. Right. And won his cases that way until he was able to say, now we can see that enforced separation of the races can never be equal. So we took that measured approach, building step by step. We copied that from him. But the enormous difference is when Thurgood Marshall came to a southern town to defend someone, he didn't know if he'd be alive at the end of the day.
And you didn't face that?
Yes.
Right. But you have called yourself, and others have, a ferocious feminist litigator.
A flaming feminist.
A flaming... And so when they say Notorious RBG, do you like that?
My clerks asked me, do you know where that comes from? I said, yes, I've heard of the Notorious B.I.G.
Yes, right, big.
And it seems altogether natural because we have one a very important thing in common, Notorious B.I.G.
Would you?
and me. We were both born and bred in Brooklyn, New York.
All right. So you know something about the Notorious B.I.G.
Yes, he died young.
Yeah, he did. He did. But you're also got a new book coming out about, or your trainer has a book. Which
Yeah.
is it? The trainer or you?
Bryant Johnson.
Johnson, your trainer.
Well, the RBG workout.
Yeah. And what is your workout habit?
What is my workout habit?
Yeah.
Maybe
Is it every day, every other day?
twice a week.
Yeah. What do you do?
And it started in 1999.
Yeah.
It was the year of my bout with colorectal cancer. So I had massive surgery, 9 months of chemotherapy, 6 weeks of daily radiation, and when I finished that trying time, my husband said, "Ruth, you look like a survivor of Auschwitz. You've got to do something to build you up." So I asked around town, and a federal district court judge, Gladys Kessler, said, "I have a great trainer. He's trained a lot of the district court judges. You will like him." And that was Bryant. And so
Bryant Johnson?
Bryant Johnson. He's been with me since 1999. We meet twice a week from 7 to 8, so I can watch the news hour while. And he has brought me up from a relatively easy beginning
To
the push-ups and the planks.
you do planks?
Yes, front and side.
Really? Now I know why they call you. Adam Liptak said to me that you are probably the most outspoken member of the court. Do you enjoy that too? I mean, you are out there, sometimes pulling back where you feel like you may have gone too far.
Well, I would dispute Adam Liptak's label. I would say that my good friend Antonin Scalia
Was more outspoken.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell us about the friendship. You both loved opera?
Yes.
You had a different look in terms of how do you interpret the Constitution? Yes?
Yes. Justice.
But the friendship transcended any differences. And you have told me before what a loss it was for you
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah. There will be a book of Justice Scalia's speeches out in October.
Yeah.
It was put together by two of his sons and a former law clerk. I wrote the introduction to the book. I love Nino particularly because he was a very funny fellow.
Yeah.
And in the days when we were buddies on the D.C. circuit, where the bench was only 3 judges, he could say something, whisper something to me, and it would be so outrageous, all I could do to avoid bursting out laughing. I had to pinch myself very.
Yeah.
And then on the court, when we were separated by several seats, he would pass notes to me that elicited the same response.
What do you think of your new colleague, Justice Gorsuch?
Justice Gorsuch is very affable,
Right.
very bright. I first encountered him, although I can't say I recall him in particular, but he was a law clerk on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit.
Right.
I do remember him from the next year when I succeeded Byron White, and Byron engaged Neil. Byron was from Colorado, Neil
Right.
from Colorado, to be his law clerk. But because Byron White was no longer sitting on the court, he shared Neil with Justice Kennedy. So that was my first meeting with my now colleague. We were together on an exchange with jurists from England, and we did a paper together for that conference.
You know, the president has now embroiled him in a controversy that you got a little bit involved in. What do you think of this recent controversy about kneeling at football games on the part of athletes in the NFL who want to make a statement about
Yeah, well,
equality?
we're not going to get engaged in that conversation because one of your colleagues played a game of gotcha with me.
How did
about
he do that?
She did it.
She did it.
I had never heard of
Kaepernick?
and she posed something that I thought was a hypothetical.
Right.
I didn't know anything about the background of it, and I could see the look in her eye that it was exactly that. She had got me.
She got you to say something controversial.
She got me to say something that I would not have said had I been better informed.
Well, I sure hope you forget that tonight.
So
Let's look back at the career, and not only in terms of the justices that you have known, but when you look back, what's the most important majority opinion you've written for you?
oh, that's like asking me which of
Child
my
you like best?
4 grandchildren and 2 step-grandchildren is my
Yeah, but you
favorite.
feel strongly that some have been enormously significant.
Yes. Well, I would say majority opinions, the Virginia Military Institute
Right, that's what
case. Last winter, I went to VMI
right.
to celebrate the 20th anniversary of that decision. And it was a joy to see how well it has worked out. They are very proud of their women cadets.
Right.
These are women who want to be engineers, nuclear scientists. They have women on the faculty now, on their board of directors. And the general, with the agreement of his faculty, told me it's a much better place.
Since you have been a fighter in the trenches for women's rights, measure how far we've come and how far we have to go.
How far we've come. Well, we are just about finished with overt gender barriers in the law. In the decade of
That's part of your own accomplishments.
Yes. Well, that was the easy job, to get rid of this is the way women are, this is the way men are, the whole separate spheres mentality that ran all through the law, that the man was the breadwinner who counted. If the woman worked, she was just a pin money earner. Her responsibility was the home and children. The laws were arranged that way. And that's what we wanted to break down. The idea was people should be free to be you and me, to develop their own talents as far as their hard work could take them, and not be held back by artificial barriers. I mean, think how it was in the 60s. There were no women in policing. There were no women firefighters. States had rules that women couldn't work at night. Which meant if you were, let's say you were a server at a banquet, well, you get the best tips at night, not in the afternoon. So there were so many distinctions that made no sense with the way people live today. So I'd say that in the beginning of the 70s, it was still the closed door era. These doors are closed to women. And now the doors are open. If they're shut, they're violating Title VII, our principal anti-discrimination in employment law. What remains is what's often called unconscious bias.
Right. In racism called implicit racism.
Yeah.
And what is that? Just simply a kind of sexism that exists without people knowing it? that they exercise a kind of unconscious discrimination?
It's not deliberate. There was a Title VII case that I think was a very good illustration. It was a case from the late 70s. It was about promoting women. It was against AT&T, and it was about promoting women to middle management jobs. So the women did very well, at least as well as the men, up until the last test, which was called a total person test. And what was the total person test? It was an interviewer sitting with the candidate for promotion and having a conversation, like we're having a conversation. If the interviewer faced someone who looked like him, there was a certain comfort level.
Right.
He felt at ease. But if he's confronting someone of a different gender, of a different race, he's a little uneasy. He doesn't quite know who this person is. He feels strange, uncomfortable. So at that last step, the total person test, the women dropped out disproportionately. And it wasn't because the interviewer deliberately engaged in discrimination.
Simply felt uncomfortable.
Yes. And I think the best illustration of that unconscious bias is what happened to symphony orchestras across America. When I was growing up, I never saw a woman in a symphony orchestra, except perhaps the harp player. No. Howard Taubman, who was the critic for the New York Times, very distinguished music critic, swore that he could tell the difference between a woman and a man playing the violin, playing the piano. So some people decided, let's put him to the test. Let's blindfold him.
Yes.
Well, he flunked the blindfold test.
Yeah.
He was all mixed up. He called, that's definitely a man. No, it's a woman. Then someone came up with the brilliant idea, why don't we drop a curtain at the auditions so the people who are doing the judging won't see the person who is auditioning. And with that simple device, the drop curtain, women began to show up in numbers, no longer one at a time curiosities.
And
now we can't duplicate that
test.
Drop curtain.
Right. Did you once say something like that you would, the answer to some question was 9 women on the Supreme Court?
I was asked, well, now you have 3. When will there be enough?
Ah, and you said 9. But so what do we need? I mean, is it cultural now? So what do we need to break down the remaining subconscious or unconscious barriers?
I think, for one thing, the more women there are in decision-making places, the more women will enter those fields.
You believe that your life will primarily, when they come to write about you, and they're already writing about you, but you're still on the court and you still face, as you have said, momentous questions that you will be one of the 9 justices that speak to, but that in the end, no matter what you do on the court, it is your lifelong battle for feminism, for the women's rights, that has defined your life and will put you, and that's what we will most appreciate about your life. Not a decision you have contributed to, but a lifelong commitment to women's equality.
I hope so. But think of the tremendous fortune I had, because I was alive and a lawyer in the 70s when it became possible for change to occur. Up until 1970, it was hopeless. In the Turning Point gender discrimination case, the ACLU knew it would be the Turning Point case. We put on the brief the names of two women, Dorothy Kenyon and Pauli Murray, because these were the women who were saying the same things that we said at a time when society was not prepared to listen. One of Dorothy Kenyon's missions was to put women on juries in every state in the country. Young people today would be astonished
That they were not women
that
jurors.
Women
juries.
were not serving on juries. And Pauli Murray was a woman way ahead of her time, both with respect to race discrimination and gender discrimination.
When do you think we'll see a woman as president?
When do I think? Well, we came pretty close.
Yes. You think sexism played a role in that campaign?
Do I think so?
Yes.
I have no doubt that it did.
Yeah. Do you think it was decisive?
That it was.
Decisive.
There
In
are
other
so
words,
many,
if
so
Hillary
many
Clinton had
things-
been a man, she would have won that election going away.
There's so many things that might have been decisive, but that was a major factors, I think. What I find hopeful is remembering back to my earliest years on the court, when the women in the Senate and the women at the court, in those days it was Sandra Day O'Connor and me, met every year. We'd have dinner together. The women in the Senate would hold the dinner one year, we would at the court the next year. There were 6 women in the Senate then. And now we have seen the numbers grow, not nearly enough, but it's quite a different scene. So the more women that are out there doing things, and the more people see that women are not all alike. I mean, we come in all sizes and shapes. So that to me, to see the entrance of women into places where they were not there before, is a hopeful sign.
Tell me what you worry about when you think about our country today.
Well, I just hope that we will stay in tune with our most basic values.
Do you worry that we're not?
The United States has always had a tension between our zeal for liberty and our concern with security. Other countries have faced that even to a greater extent. Israel is one. There was a very wise former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Israel who said, "We could give our enemy no greater gift than if we allow our concern for security to so overwhelm us that we come to resemble our enemy."
We become a closed society.
Yes, more and more. We surrender what makes us proud, what makes us free.
So we build walls and we try to keep people out.
But this is not something new in the United States. Think of what happened in World War II, when people of Japanese ancestry were taken from their homes, put in detention camps for no reason other than
Fear.
yes, yeah. Or going back very early in the history of our country, the Alien and Sedition Act. I think it was Adams' administration.
But I'm asking you right now, this time in 2017, in September of 2017, you were genuinely worried that in the interest of security, we may be trampling on individual liberties.
Am I worried?
Yes.
Yes, but I am also encouraged by the number of people, especially young people, who don't want this to happen and are expressing themselves in opposition, reminding us, as I said earlier in our conversation about the 50s, reminding us of our most basic values, our freedom. And if we surrender that, then we really are indistinguishable.
But it's a real concern of yours.
Is it a real concern of mine?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Should be a concern of everyone.
Yeah, but I'm pushing it beyond that. It should always be a concern that we have the right balance between individual liberty and security. Both are values, but you seem to be saying that you feel, I'm trying to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to understand clearly what you believe, and you, with the wisdom that you have from the experiences you have, and you look at the circumstances in the country today, and you feel we have tilted more towards security and more towards protection and away to our long-held and deep respect for individual liberty, that it's exaggerated in these times that we live in now.
Well, I think it's a challenge for all people who do love liberty,
Right.
to see that we don't lose it.
And be prepared to protest and defend it when you think it's in jeopardy.
Do I think it's appropriate when it's in jeopardy to try to protect what should be our hallmark and our pride.
Help us understand too, because you've thought about this too in the battles that you have fought. What is the strength of the country that you believe? You sit there on the Supreme Court as one of 9 people, and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are the strengths of this country. Our values are the strength of this country.
Well, one is, do you know the song Ballad for America?
Yes.
There's a line in it, the right to speak my mind out. That's America to me. The other is the diversity of our country. This was brought home to me in the 60s when I was off in Sweden for 4 months, and my first subway ride when I came back to New York, and I looked at the people in that car, and from every race, every region of the world. Somehow, we have been able to be many and yet one in our attachment to freedom and liberty. That when I grew up, I memorized Emma Lazarus's poem on the Statue of Liberty. This country was a country, all of us except Native Americans have an origin someplace else. So, and there isn't any other country that has that, where people came here seeking freedom, economic well-being, yes.
Yeah. Freedom from religious persecution. Freedom from totalitarianism.
And that's what the land of liberty is. It's a land that welcomes people who were living under conditions of oppression.
You're going to have to consider, I think, tell me where the travel ban is now, because I think the court, no, wasn't there a recent, you've sent it back to, because they have changed the travel ban, they've added new states, and so exactly what did...
What we did, the travel ban that we have had has expired.
Right.
It's no longer the law. So the court issued an order to have both sides file briefs on the question whether this case is now dead. There is a new travel ban, but it's different from the one that was before us. So we have taken it off the calendar, pending what the parties tell us whether the parties tell what they think about whether the case is still alive or that controversy is over because that ban is no longer in effect.
So we don't know yet whether that, in fact, will come back to the court.
We will get the parties' views on whether the case is live, and based on those submissions, we will reach a decision.
You know, one of the interesting things is that we have this impression, I mean, if you haven't been to Washington, I'm sure everybody here has, to go to the Supreme Court and to walk in the Supreme Court and see that great statue of John Marshall, is it?
Yes, downstairs in the Great Hall.
In the Great Hall. And you know, you can go and you can watch the justices as they listen to the attorneys argue a case. But there are lots of impressions of the court. For example, you have said to me before, you know, there are a lot of things the court agrees on. You know,
Yes.
the number of things that they have these spirited, important constitutional debates on is only a small part of what
Yes.
you do. There's a lot that comes before you. 9 justices agree.
Last term, fully half the decisions were unanimous. And there were only, I think there were under 10 where we divided 5-3, because for most of the time last term we had only 8 justices.
Right. Under 10 in which you divided 5-3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's usually the sharp disagreements, the 5-4 decisions, it runs about 20% in a typical term.
How did the court change when Sandra Day O'Connor left?
It was an enormous change.
I know, you've spoken to me about it, but explain to this audience.
And I can, the simplest way to put it is to say, when she left, every decision that came out that term, where I was one of 4, if she had remained, I would have been one of 5. So that her retirement was a major change for
Because she was a swing justice.
She was, and she was comfortable in that position. Some people are indecisive. She was not.
And nor are you. Justice Kennedy now has that role.
Yes, in most cases, when we divide 5-4.
That gives you huge power, doesn't it?
He's also an awesome responsibility.
Yeah. You made a surprise speech the other day. You were the surprise speaker at a Jewish New Year service. During the services for the New Year in Washington, telling worshipers that you believe being Jewish helped you empathize, which is a great quality, I think, empathy. Being Jewish helped you empathize with other minority groups. Explain.
Yes. Well, if you were the outsider, if you belong to a group that was cordoned off, lived in ghettos, were in constant fear of what the state might do. And this was brought home to me powerfully by being a child brought up in World War II years. So if you come from a group with a history of oppression, of minority status, then you are empathetic to others who are outsiders.
You're then the longest serving Jewish member of the court.
Yes. I had said, people have been asking me now for some time, because my next birthday, I will be 85.
85. All right. And might we say a healthy 85 because of Bryant Johnson.
But it started, I guess, when I turned 70. When are you going to step down?
Yeah.
So I had a stock answer. I said, Justice Brandeis was appointed when he was the same age as I was when he was appointed. We were both 60. He was on the court for 23 years. I expect to stay at least as long as Justice Brandeis. Well, then now I'm about 2 years past.
Yeah. So what's the new standard?
So now my answer is I will remain in this good job as long as I can do it full steam.
And we hope for a long time.
Well, I have.
But you're 84 on 85. Justice Breyer, who I interviewed on this very same stage, is what, 79, 80?
Yeah, 79.
79, I think. So Donald Trump may have the chance. May. So you keep up exercise, okay?
Yeah, well, Justice Breyer is also using Bryant Johnson.
So the future of the country's in Bryant Johnson's hands. You go out there and you buy that book, okay? So as long as you feel like you are doing the job that President Clinton asked you to do when he appointed you, you'll be right there on your seat in the Supreme Court.
Like Justice John Paul Stevens.
Yes.
He stepped down when he was 90.
And he was, so you got 5 years at least. That'll take you through another presidential election.
And he was, he was swift in getting out his opinions. Since he stepped down from the court, he has published 2 books, and he's well on his way to completing the 3rd.
All right. And listen, I'm with you. For goodness sakes, I'm with you. You know, I think the word retirement is an awful word. Justice Souter, who has left the court but still alive, had said that the first year on the job is like walking into a tidal wave. Did you feel any of that?
Walking into
A tidal wave.
I had the advantage of
Having served.
And served not only in a federal court, but in the company town in Washington, D.C.
Right.
The U.S. courthouse is just a few blocks down.
And it's a breeding ground for Supreme Court justices.
Justice
It is.
Thomas, Justice Scalia, and I were all from there.
But throughout history, it's been an important place.
Yes, because it's the one U.S. Court of Appeals that has a nationwide draw.
Yeah.
You know, after the Civil War, Lincoln disbanded what was the then Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit because he thought that they were all Southern sympathizers. So why, he said, should the Court of Appeals in the nation's capital have a bunch of Southerners? The draw should be from across the country. So the D.C. Circuit is the one circuit where nominees can come from any place. In the other circuits, the regional circuits, the nominees come from that area, from those states.
Do you take great pride in the Supreme Court in terms of decisions on marriage equality?
Do I take great pride? It's the court doing the job that the Constitution assigns?
Yeah, but you know what I'm asking. Yeah. I mean, this was something you believed in, and I mean, you know, the issues presented by that case spoke to your own philosophy of individual.
The case never would have come out the way it did if everyday people, didn't begin to care. And I think that the change came about because gay people who were once in the closet, afraid to say who they were, came out of the closet and said, this is who I am and I'm proud of it. And then we looked around, and who were they? They were our next door neighbor, our child's best friend. There wasn't the kind of we-they that has plagued racial discrimination, where people live in areas that are segregated, even today. So that didn't exist once people were willing to say, this is who I am, and I'm proud of it. And if that hadn't happened, we never would have seen it. So the court is never in the vanguard of change. People had to change. Attitudes had to change. When Chief Justice Rehnquist engaged a woman as his administrative assistant who was a lesbian, open about it, her partner came to court functions, and that was, I think, a signal that things were really changing. Attitudes were changing in the country.
I think the woman who brought the case died recently.
Windsor, she brought the DOMA case.
The DOMA case, right. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes once said, "The life of the law has not been logic, it's been experience."
Yes, that's a very famous quotation.
Yes, I know. What do you think?
Well,
I read it. I know it's a famous. I'm asking you, what do you agree with him? Not logic, but experience. We're shaped by experience even more than logic.
Well, the law exists to govern a society. The law exists in the service of a society. So the experience of the society, of course, is going to be reflected in the law. If the law is aridly logical and has nothing to do with the way people live, it's not going to be a successful regime.
When you look forward to, what brings you great satisfaction beyond the law, beyond sitting on the court, and I should say beyond family, which has been so important? You have made the case and made the statement more than once that you had the great pleasure of being married to a man and being of the conviction yourself that you could have a great job, have a great family, have great children. You didn't have to make sacrifices of any of those things to have a complete life.
And I am very sad when I hear people say, to climb to the top of the tree in the legal profession, you have to relinquish home and family life. Right. And I wonder at that. First woman appointed to the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor, has 3 sons. And I have 2 children. And it should not be any less possible for a woman than for a man. But it takes a sympathetic partner. It takes a partner who thinks that what you do is as important as what he does.
And Marty thought that.
He was extraordinary in that way. He had such complete confidence in himself that he thought, well, if I want to spend my life with her, she's got to be pretty terrific.
He's a pretty good tax lawyer, too, wasn't he?
Yeah, the best in America. And
I know.
And
no, you're not the only person that thought that.
Marty is the supreme chef. It is the best-selling book in the Supreme Court gift shop.
Yeah.
It was when he died.
The Supreme Chef, is that what the title is?
Yes, Supreme Chef.
Right.
And it's a collection of
his recipes?
His recipes.
Yeah.
Marty was very popular with the Supreme Court spouses. Yeah. They met quarterly for lunch.
Yes.
And they rotated catering responsibilities. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Marty was always the number 1 pick to be co-caterer.
It just goes on and on, folks, I'm telling you. I've been in her office. When you were given an honorary degree at Columbia, was it Columbia, I think, and you were sang to On His Knees?
And,
Was it at Columbia?
oh, no, that was...
Was that Harvard?
That was, yes, the famous
Tell the story.
serenade. So I get the list of honorees.
Right, honorary degree at Harvard.
And I know that...
This is the one they gave you because you refused to be given an honorary degree from the law school, insisted it had to be the whole university. The university capitulated and gave you an honorary degree, and among the people there was the great opera singer.
Elena proposed to give me not an honorary degree. She supposed to give me the degree that I should have gotten.
Oh, right, that's right.
When I spent 2 years at Harvard and only one at Columbia. Anyway, so I know that I'm going to sit next to Placido Domingo.
Exactly.
Because they arranged us in alphabetical order.
Right.
But I had no idea that he was going to get up and serenade me at this graduation. The students had written lyrics to Celeste Aida.
Yes.
And there's a wonderful picture. You saw it in my chambers. You might call it Woman in Ecstasy.
So, was it him or the music that did it for you?
To be so close to that magnificent
voice.
Yes, it was like it really was like an electric current.
You what?
It was like an electric current running through me.
Really? Electric current that ran through your body?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, my goodness. He probably felt the same thing, I assume. You know, that's what we call magic, right?
It was a magical moment.
Yeah.
It was.
Well, you know, you have to treasure those moments. But you have said, I mean, to your husband, Marty, you said, I betray no secret in reporting. Get this, see, I love love. I betray no secret in reporting that without Marty, I would not have gained a seat on the Supreme Court. You said that.
Yes.
Without him,
absolutely right.
Because of the kind of life he enabled you to lead so that you could be who you wanted to be.
Yes. And he was remarkable. I've said many times, in the 1950s, I went to Cornell University. Cornell University had a 4-to-1 ratio, 4 men to every woman.
Right.
It was the favorite school for parents of daughters because if you couldn't find your man at Cornell, you were hopeless.
Yeah. We're just getting warmed up, boys and girls.
So I had never met a boy who cared at all that I had a brain. That's not what they were interested in. And he was Marty, who we loved.
At first sight? Hmm? At first sight?
At first sight? Not exactly.
But it is a gift to have a long and great marriage. You know, it makes everything else easy.
56 years, yeah.
50?
56.
Yeah, yeah. He died in 2010?
Yes.
But
he really cheated death because he had a virulent cancer when he was a young man in his 3rd year in law school.
Yeah. What did you do? And as I remember, there was a special tribute from the court too, was there not? In some way, the justices.
We had a memorial, a celebration of Marty's life at the court, but the lasting tribute is Supreme Chef, the cookbook.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Martha Ann Alito, the wife of Justice Alito, said that the perfect tribute to Marty will be a book of his recipes.
Yeah. You also have been an opera star yourself. I don't want to forget about this. Didn't you play a small role in Donizetti's The Daughter of the Regiment?
Yes, but I'm not an opera star because I'm a monotone. I've said many, many times if I could have any talent God could give me, I would be a great diva. I
You
would
would.
be Renata Tebaldi. I would be Beverly
So if you
Sills.
could have chosen between being, played a role in the advancement of women, being an important justice on the Supreme Court, you would have given all that up to be a great diva. Yes, you would.
It's a hypothetical question because I don't
But
have.
it says something about your values and says something about.
But I did. There are very few operas that have a strictly speaking part.
Right.
Daughter of the Regiment is one.
Yes.
And there's a role for the Duchess of Krakentorp.
Yeah.
And that's who I was.
All right, I've got a lot more questions, but I'm going to get this audience involved. If you could give me the house lights, we'll take some questions here and explore this delightful human being. Raise your hand, and we will try to get it. Yes, ma'am, right there. There'll be a microphone right in front of you. These can be a lot of the legal questions, or they can be questions about what's it like to be going strong at 84.
Great. Sorry, this is like the coolest thing to ever happen to me. So,
Hold the mic close to your.
sorry. Okay, so as someone who I just graduated from law school, I'm starting my legal career, and I always found you incredibly inspiring. With all of the, I guess, divisive and offensive sometimes rhetoric that comes out of this administration or just people in general, and women and LGBTQ individuals and people of color, fighting every day to just make the world a better place. I guess, what words of encouragement do you have for us to keep fighting?
That's a very good question. Words of encouragement of people who are making the good fight for ideas and principles that they believe in.
Well, if you care about the future of your country, if you care about the future of your family, your children and grandchildren, then you have to be part of the struggle.
There is no alternative. There's no alternative. Yes, right there. We'll get to you in just a moment. Yes, back there, though.
Who is it?
Oh, here. Thank you. When you look back at all the cases that you voted on, are there any specific cases that you wish you had voted on differently?
That's a question I'm often asked, and I wonder why, because I have followed the good advice I was given by a colleague on the D.C. Circuit when I was a brand new judge. And the judge was Ed Tam.
Right.
And he said, Ruth, these are hard cases. The D.C. Circuit has a lot of administrative law cases from the 3- and 4-letter agencies. He said, you work very hard on each case. But when the opinion is released, don't look back. Don't worry about things that are over and done. Go on to the next case and give it your all. So I think that's very good advice for a judge. It doesn't do any good to worry over past.
Okay. Next, right here. Did you have a question? Okay, let's get a microphone.
Should I stand up?
Yeah, hold them up close to you. Stand up. Yes, stand up. Microphone very close to your mouth. Yes.
So last year in 5th grade, I pretended to be you because I did a whole thing, and I dressed up as you, and I learned a lot about you, and I really admire.
Was it at Halloween that you dressed like that?
Oh, there's a picture. That's her as you.
Oh,
Pretty good, huh?
yes, very good.
And I made a whole booth.
Pretty good. Go ahead. So what was it like?
Well, it was a good experience.
Is your brother?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Good you brought him.
It was a very good experience,
Yeah.
and I learned a lot about her. I learned everything about her life, and I really admire her. But do you know anyone who admires you so much, looks up to you and everything?
Do I know?
Do you owe, yeah, who do you, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Who, when you tick off the people that have made a difference, we've talked about your husband. Were there teachers? Were there, you often spoke about your mother as a huge influence on you.
Yes. And teachers, certainly, yes.
Yes. Anybody come to mind and answer her question that sort of gave you the kind of wisdom that people are looking to you for? You know what I mean?
Well, it started with my mother,
Right.
and then my teachers in school. Teachers make an enormous difference in what a child.
Why was your mother an inspiration?
My mother was an extremely intelligent woman, and she was a voracious reader. My most cherished memories from the earliest days I can remember is sitting on mother's lap and she would read to me. When I was in elementary school, I had a weekly excursion with my mother to the library. And she would get her hair done while I would spend
Reading books.
the hour or so and picking the 5 books that I would take home.
Anybody?
And also because she was wise enough to communicate to me, be independent. Now this was an era when the expectation was a girl should meet Prince Charming
Yes.
and marry and live happily ever after. My mother thought, well, that would be okay if Prince Charming came along, but I should.
But you got to be prepared if there's no
I
Prince
should
Charming.
be able to fend for myself.
Exactly. I think you absorbed the lesson. Right there. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
And
Get the microphone. Hold it close to your mouth.
I think it was a bad precedent for the U.S. Senate not to allow President Obama to fill Justice Scalia's seat.
I can't comment on whether it was a bad precedent. I can say it was the prerogative of the Senate. The Senate has, the president can nominate, and it's the Senate that has to confer. And throughout history, nominations have failed, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for very bad reasons. That's been the history of it.
Decision made by the Senate Majority Leader.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. Yes, right here. Yes, sir.
How significant was your Brooklyn upbringing affect your life?
And Brooklyn is very much a part of me. That I grew up in the 40s, and although I'm not a baseball fan, I was in those years. It was just such an exhilarating thing to see Jackie Robinson on the field at Ebbets Field.
Yeah.
I had no idea then what that man endured, not only from the other team, but from players on his own team.
Harrison Ford was on I taped a program today, and I asked him what was the role that meant the most to him, and he said playing Branch Rickey. We were talking about small films in contrast to Indiana Jones and all of that.
There was another place, I guess my dream place in Brooklyn was the Brooklyn Academy of Music.
Yes.
I had a Saturday subscription to children's
But you said you don't have a very good voice. You said.
And I said I'm a monotone,
Yeah.
a sparrow, not a robin.
So then, have you learned any instruments? Do you play the piano?
I played the piano. I took piano lessons even when I was in college. And I learned the cello so I could be in my high school orchestra.
Yeah.
it's a beautiful instrument. I had no ambition to be any better than the last player, the last row. I knew I didn't have very much talent, but the experience of being in a symphony orchestra was tremendous.
Oh boy, yes. Okay, I'm gonna go to the back, so because you often don't get to be heard. Go well, way back, somebody in the back. Also, we'll get you upstairs as well, so whoever has the best question upstairs will be called on. Yes.
Is there ever sort of debate over who gets to write the majority opinion? And was there ever a time where you fought to write it, or were disappointed that you didn't get to be the one to author the actual opinion?
Yeah, can I just expand on that question? Take us through what happens in terms of between the time that the court agrees to hear a case,
Yes.
and oral arguments are presented. What you do, what the justices do, the asking questions, deciding how the court decides, and who, I assume the Chief Justice decides who writes the majority opinion, or does he?
Well, let me go through the process. So it takes 4 votes to grant review in a case.
Right.
If we take a case, then the lawyers will brief it. The word brief is a misnomer. Briefs. Lawyers tend to fill the space allotted, so if we say 50 pages, you can be sure that even if it's a single issue, relatively comprehensible case, you will get the 50 pages. Then there is the oral argument. That's fleeting. It's only half hour aside. We will sit 2 weeks in a row, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And on Wednesday afternoon, we meet to discuss Monday's cases, Monday's arguments. On Friday morning, we will meet to discuss the Tuesday and Wednesday cases. At the end of that 2-week cycle, on that second Friday afternoon, the chief hands out our homework assignments.
Right.
And it's listed in seniority order. Whenever he's in majority, he assigns the opinion. If he's not in the majority, then the most
Senior.
does the assigning. And when we divide 5-4, the dissent will also be assigned. It will be assigned by the most senior judge on the dissent side. So you can't volunteer for a case.
You can't sort of whisper into the Chief Justices or whoever's going to decide, I'd like to write this one.
Well, the Chief Justice knows, since I taught civil procedure for 17 years, I would love to write all the procedure decisions. But I don't have a better chance of that than Justice Breyer, who taught antitrust for many years. He would like to write all the antitrust decisions.
Yeah. Have you had a favorite Chief Justice?
You mean going back in history?
Yeah, going back. No. I mean, well, yes, all the way back in history first, and then that you have personally known since 1993. Rehnquist.
Rehnquist, and then now
John Roberts.
John Roberts, yes.
You like Rehnquist?
Yes, I think that's an understatement. He was a man who grew in that office. Think of Justice Rehnquist in the 70s. He was often the lone dissenter. I fully expected he would dissent from all of the cases where I prevailed. One time I was wrong, but only once. Then all of you know what the famous Miranda case was, yeah. The warnings that the police have to give.
The Miranda ruling came out on the Miranda
case.
As
a justice, Justice Rehnquist said, this is a rule we should not have. The police should not be so hampered But then we had a case that put to the court squarely the question, should Miranda be overruled? And he wrote the decision that said, no, it has become part of our culture. And
It's interesting.
or if you think of the, this is the man who wrote, discrimination on the basis of pregnancy is not discrimination on the basis of sex, a remarkable view. And yet, in his later years, he wrote an opinion upholding a law that was passed with the woman worker in mind, the Family and Medical Leave Act. Right. It was under attack. The chief assigned that opinion to himself, and it was such a good opinion that when I took it home and showed it to Marty, he asked, Ruth, tell me, did you write that decision for him?
All right,
so
somebody,
he's my example of as we live, we can learn.
all right, we'll go here, and then I'm trying to mix it up with, and then we'll go to over there. Yes?
How often, if at all, when you hear a case, you, on oral argument, you know the answer, or do you, that the way you want to vote, or do you have to read the briefs and be prepared? Is it something that's sometimes emotional, or is it always the law?
When we come to the bench to hear oral argument, we would have spent hours and hours with the case, starting not with the briefs, but with the record. I mean, we have the luxury of deciding something that good minds have already decided in the trial court and then on appeal. So I always start with the opinions written by the judges who had to deal with the case in the first instance and the second instance. It's also a good check on how honest the lawyers are, because if the lawyers distort what the opinions were below, I know that I can't trust that brief.
Oh, that's interesting. So if a lawyer is distorting what's been decided before, and you know it because you and your law clerks have studied it, you don't trust that and are less likely to accept his or her argument.
Yes, and it will.
Credibility destroyed.
So, but in answering the question, so it would be rare after having spent all those hours studying a case, if you didn't come to the bench leaning in one direction or the other. The oral argument seldom is
Changes your
determinative.
mind.
Yeah. Most people, you go in leaning one way, you're likely to go out leaning that same way.
Right here, yes, the person with the hand raised. Yes. Okay, we're coming over here, so.
Hi. What book had the greatest impact on your life and why?
Oh goodness, I couldn't pick one single book. Let's say, my favorite book, I guess, when I was in high school was War and Peace.
Yes.
But I can't say that book, as opposed to, that had the greatest influence on my life. Lots of books did.
Right there. It's hard to see, and I'm trying to see your faces, but I'm trying to do as best I can. Also, I promised to come upstairs, so we'll be there next.
Justice Ginsburg, we've talked a lot about your voice tonight, and it made my brain start going because your voice has resonated throughout our country and throughout our world because of your raw intelligence and your eloquence. But it also led me to think back to feminism, and I'm looping back to, we've talked a lot recently about voices, especially female voices, being irritating or being interrupted or being too shrill, or how to tone down your voice, or how to be a woman in a profession that's dominated by men and how to succeed. So my question to you is, do you have any strategic advice for those of us who are trying to convey our voices?
You should, you should speak in your own voice. Let me tell you a funny story. There was an argument, oral argument, when Justice O'Connor was asking the lawyer some questions. I thought that she had finished, so I asked a question, and Justice O'Connor said, "Just a minute, I'm not finished." The next day, the headline in the USA Today was, "Rude Ruth interrupts Sandra." Because at lunch I said, "Sandra, I'm so sorry I stepped on your question." And her answer to me was, "Ruth, the guys do it to each other all the time, think nothing of it." So when this reporter confronted me, I said, "Have you watched my male colleagues? Do they interrupt each other?" He watched for a month, and then he came to my chambers and said, "You know, you're right. They do. They interrupt each other all the time, but I never noticed it when it's two women."
This is what the implicit,
Yes.
unconscious
Or
differences.
I was on the court for 12 years, and still, at every session, there was a lawyer who, when I asked a question, responded, "Justice O'Connor," and she would sometimes say, "I'm Justice O'Connor, she's Justice Ginsburg." But they heard a woman's voice, and although we don't speak alike, we don't look alike. I was called Justice O'Connor. And let me add one more thing. There was a woman who wanted to help me. She wanted to explain where this interruption came from. So her op-ed piece was to this effect: Justice O'Connor is a laid-back girl of the Golden West.
Yes.
Justice Ginsburg is a fast-talking Jew from New York. Well, the truth is, Sandra could get out 2 words to my every one. What is another example of a stereotype?
Yeah.
And this very well-intentioned woman gave that as the explanation of why I interrupted Sandra.
All right, let's go upstairs. Who has a mic? Anybody? Is there a mic up there? All right.
I'm 12 years old, and I'm working to finish my bat mitzvah work, and I'm researching Jewish women in public service like you. What advice do you have for me, young girls?
Well, first, I think you're fantastically advantaged because there are so many Jewish women to admire. I think in my own words, there's one piece that speaks about 3 women that powerfully influenced me, and one was Henrietta Soul, the founder of Hadassah, one was Emma Lazarus, and one was Anne Frank. And you're so lucky to be studying for your bat mitzvah, something that did not exist when I was growing up. There was the bar mitzvah,
but
there was no bat mitzvah.
All right, well, one last question before we call it an I can't. Let me go back and get these people, I promise. Yes, sir, I saw you before. Okay.
For a good portion of the last 2 weeks, I've been watching Ken Burns' series on the Vietnam War. And if my wife or kids come into the room, I raise the volume to the point where they have to leave, because I really am finding it extremely interesting. And a period of where there was a lot of deceit and lies coming out from leadership, both sides of the aisle, and there's just a mistrust of elected officials and appointees making statements without facts to back it up. So this is in the mid-'60s, 67, 1968, where it is as of last night's show. But it resembles today's, government that we see, or administration that we are in. Can the court do anything to help save us?
Well, we were saved that time in the Vietnam War. And my daughter and I were in Vietnam 2 summers ago, and it was amazing to me how much the Vietnamese people liked
Americans.
yes. I mean, they didn't have great love for the Chinese or
No,
the
that's
French.
right. That's correct.
But I was overwhelmed by it. And there was also an organization called the American Veterans of the Vietnam War who were helping to uncover the many unexploded bombs that are in Vietnam that makes construction there so difficult. Doing what they can to aid victims, napalm victims and their families. That's the true American spirit. But when we say, is this the worst of times? I'm glad you pointed that out, because there have been times in the past that have, this is the worst. It couldn't get any.
And we're a nation of laws.
But do we have another question?
Yes. No. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just, only because I don't want you to have to go home this evening. I think with your sister having to ask a question and you not having to ask a question. So, but I'm counting on this being the most brilliant question of the day.
So, to start off first, my sister's middle name is Ruth, and she's reading Anne Frank. And my question is, what is your most wowing case?
What, my most...
Your most wow, your most what? Repeat.
Wowing.
Wow. Your most amazing case. Your most amazing case.
Well, one case I would categorize that way. It was a case where I was on the losing side. It was a 5-4.
Right.
And it was the Lily Ledbetter case.
Right.
And Lily Ledbetter was a woman who was a manager in a tire plant. Right. She was the only woman doing the job. She discovered when she'd been there a dozen or so years that she was being paid less than even the young man that she had trained to do the job. So she brought a lawsuit to say, I was denied equal pay, and so I want the court to give me the pay that I should have received all those years. My court, in a decision that I considered egregiously wrong, said she sued too late. The law says you have to sue within 180 days of the time you encountered the discrimination. You sued more than a dozen years later. My view of the case was simply every time she received a paycheck that showed that differential, the discrimination was renewed, so she could sue within 180 days of her most recent paycheck. So I wrote a dissenting opinion in which I tried to explain that Lily Ledbetter's experience of what has been the experience of every woman of her age. That is, you get a job that up until then has been done by men. So you don't want to be seen as a troublemaker. You don't want to rock the boat. And besides, they don't give out pay figures, so you don't know that you're being paid less. And if you're a realist, you'd say, suppose I had sued early on. The very first time, I had a suspicion that I was not being paid what my coworkers were being paid. You know what the defense would have been. It has nothing to do with Lily being a woman. She just doesn't do the job as well. But then she works there year after year, and she gets good performance ratings, So now she has a winnable case. They can't say she doesn't do the job as well because they rated her better than the men that they're paying more. But the court said she sued too late. So I wrote, the last line of the opinion was, the ball is now in Congress's court to correct the error into which my colleagues have fallen.
And did they do it?
Overwhelming majority, both sides of the aisle, passed the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act that adopted. So sometimes when you lose, you end up winning.
Let me ask you one last thing on my behalf. Do you think that the Supreme Court, because you have spoken to this and Justice Breyer has, will consider the constitutionality of the death penalty?
Of the
death penalty.
The court did once, and then it took it back. That was many years ago. What the court has ruled recent years, not on that large question, but on the circumstances in which the death penalty can be administered. Can you execute a juvenile, somebody who is intellectually disabled? There are now only 6 states where executions occur. More have death penalty on the books, but don't administer it. So each year, the number of executions has gone down and down. And it isn't even the 6 states, entire state. It is particular counties within states. So you're with one district attorney, he is tough on crime, off with your head. And the other thinks the quality of mercy is not strained, so doesn't ask for the death penalty. That kind of unevenness can't really persist. So it may well be that we never get the big question because the death penalty will die of attrition.
Finally, I say to this audience, and having done this for so long, with great pride to come here into this place, in this auditorium, it is with great pride that I come here this evening as we celebrate one of our own, a New Yorker who has made us all proud. Please join me in thanking Judge.